They laughed when she stepped off the ship. Not just one or two snickers, full-on howling from a squadron of towering alien war commanders, some with tusks that clacked from amusement, others wiping moisture from their scaled eyelids as they doubled over. The cause of their mirth was simple. Earth's elite new recruit was a 5'4" woman who looked more like a lost technician than a battlefield asset. She had no visible armor enhancements, no cybernetic limbs, no heavy weapon strapped to her back. Just a dull gray uniform, a standard-issue rifle, and a look on her face that suggested she'd seen this all before. Because she had. Commander Harkle of the Graxian front jabbed a clawed thumb at her and boomed across the loading bay, asking if Earth had finally run out of soldiers and started shipping housekeepers. Another alien officer, glimmering in obsidian-scaled armor, joked that maybe she was the entertainment. Even the human officers exchanged awkward glances, pretending not to hear. Lex didn't flinch. She simply adjusted the strap of her rifle, stepped over a discarded alien ribcage like it was a puddle, and walked toward the command tent without a word. Her silence irritated them more than any protest could have. Inside the war tent, where holographic maps flickered above the council table, the commanders were already reviewing kill zones and resistance nests. Lex stood silently at the back, saying nothing. No one invited her to sit. No one asked her opinion. Harkle made a show of rotating the hologram toward his preferred flank, slicing through the projection to erase Earth's input entirely. He loudly suggested they deploy the human to food pack security on the southern ridge, just in case she got cold and fragile. That one earned a roar of laughter and a sarcastic slow clap from Commander Irok of the Volskeri Shock Battalion. The tone shifted when the room moved outside for the live fire calibration. The training zone was perched on a cliff, overlooking a vast frozen canyon where enemy drones swept through randomized flight paths for targeting exercises. Lex lined up with a squadron of armored coalition elites, each outfitted with gear worth more than a medium-sized transport ship. When it was her turn, Irok grinned and handed her a faulty rifle. Its energy coil had been deliberately undercharged, barely able to spark beyond 50 meters. A prank, of course. The kind every recruit got. Lex took it without blinking, powered it up, and in one smooth motion, ejected the coil. She pulled a worn spare from her belt, slotted it in, and dropped to one knee in the firing line. "Target 4-Tango," she muttered. No one was sure what she was aiming at. The drone she called out hadn't appeared yet. Then a black blur whipped through the canyon air, darting through jagged rocks at over 400 kilometers per hour. Lex fired a single shot. A sizzling blue bolt cut the wind. Half a second later, the drone disintegrated mid-curve, detonating into a cascade of metal and flame. The impact echoed. A few stunned soldiers scanned the kill telemetry. One of the Graxians accidentally let out a low growl. That drone was untargeted. Randomized pattern. She shouldn't have even seen it. Lex stood, handed the rifle back to Irok, and walked off the firing line. Her boots crunched snow like the sound of closing arguments in a trial no one expected her to win. No smirk. No comment. Just that same look of weary calm as if she just cleaned her kitchen, not surgically deleted a target flying at speeds most couldn't even track. The silence around the line was thicker than the snowfall. Inside the warbase barracks later that night, files began circulating. Someone had pulled her deployment sheet from Earth Command. The image listed her name as Sergeant L. Wren. No medals. No history of campaigns. No prior stationing. Just a fresh enlistment date, and a series of vague civilian accomplishments. Not even a confirmed squad. Suspicious. Alien soldiers murmured theories. A morale stunt. A bait unit. One even suggested she was a synthetic experiment from Earth's forgotten Cold Rings program. No one wanted to believe the truth was simpler. That she might just be that good. The following morning, Lex reported for duty as assigned. Harkle, still unimpressed, deployed her to Glass Ridge. The site had recently suffered 3 ambushes, with entire platoons wiped out. The Coalition considered it a cursed zone, but they couldn't afford to abandon it. It was the only route with elevation high enough for comms relay. She was to accompany a mixed-species recon unit up the ridge, observe, and report back. No one expected her to make it past the first bend. In fact, 2 commanders placed a bet whether she'd freeze to death or run when the first enemy blast came. As they flew low in a skiff over the jagged terrain, snows slapping the hull like teeth, Lex sat near the edge with her eyes closed, counting breaths. A bulky Volscary soldier beside her asked if she'd ever killed anything that fought back. She opened one eye and calmly replied, "Yes. But I rarely had to shoot twice." He chuckled, then realized she wasn't joking. They reached the drop point by dusk. Wind howled like something alive, and the ridge loomed in frozen layers, carved sharp by alien winters. The recon unit fanned out. Lex stayed low, scanning the terrain with the quiet focus of someone who wasn't looking for trouble but knew exactly what it smelled like. 10 minutes in, the squad leader vanished in a flash of light. Cloaked raiders. Plasma bolts followed. The unit returned fire, but visibility dropped fast. Lex was gone. The others thought she had bolted, disappeared into the snow to save herself. One of them even radioed back to command, confirming Earth's recruit had abandoned the squad under fire. They'd barely finished transmitting when a corpse slid down the slope, head split clean. No one saw who did it. Then a second body dropped, then a third, all from different angles. Laser sights picked up nothing. The enemies started pulling back. No one wanted to admit they were afraid. But fear moved through them like cold water. The air was too still. Then she reappeared, dragging 3 weapons behind her, one enemy helmet tucked under her arm like a trophy, face unreadable. She looked at the remaining squad and spoke for the first time in an hour. "I counted 13. There were only 12. And that was the moment the silence turned to dread. The ice winds at Glass Ridge had a voice of their own, and it wasn't a kind one. It howled through broken cliffs and overhangs like a warning that the mountain did not tolerate weakness. Most troops hated this post. The terrain was brutal, the visibility worse, and the enemy always seemed to know where you were before you knew they were near. After Lex's return from the ambush, silent, calm, and carrying the remains of 3 enemies, no one laughed at her anymore. But they didn't welcome her either. Fear is a wall too thick for respect to climb, and now they feared her more than the enemy. The coalition squad, what was left of it, huddled in the makeshift outpost embedded into a frozen cave wall. The Volscary heavy Jorv couldn't stop watching her. Every time Lex moved, even just to adjust her rifle strap or scan a readout, he tensed like she might vanish and reappear behind him with a knife. The others avoided her entirely, especially the Graxian sniper who had mocked her shot earlier. He now sat in the far corner cleaning his scope obsessively like it would keep him safe. Lex sat on a crate of depleted battery cores, eyes fixed on nothing, as if replaying every footstep she took to the ridge and back, mapping every inch of terrain in her mind. When the field commander checked in via encrypted uplink, they asked for a casualty report. Jorv began reciting the names of the fallen until the voice on the other end interrupted and asked about the human. Jorv paused. Lex answered instead. She said 5 were confirmed Kia, 6 enemy contacts neutralized by unknown variables, and comms interference still strong at the eastern cliff. The commander asked who handled the kills. Lex answered with just one word. Present. Then the channel cut. No one spoke after that. The wind howled outside like something was scratching at the mountain itself. And then, as if summoned, the alarms flared. Motion sensors in the southern sector tripped. Heat signatures. Large. Coordinated. The kind that only meant one thing. Another ambush. Lex stood before the second alarm even registered. Jorv cursed under his breath and grabbed his heavy repeater. The rest of the squad scrambled into position. But Lex didn't run to the turret or brace near the front barricade. She slipped through a narrow break in the back wall and disappeared into the white like she'd melted into the storm itself. Outside, visibility was barely 10 meters. The snow was no longer falling but cutting sideways, slicing against skin and armor. The enemy came fast, beasts in engineered armor, 4-legged and plasma-cloaked, with cloaking tech that stuttered in and out as they moved. They were hunting again. This ridge had become their proving ground. The coalition braced for loss. The last time these creatures hit, half a platoon was erased in minutes. Now they were 5. And then something strange happened. The enemies slowed. They began pausing between strides. Looking around. Not at the outpost. Behind themselves. Like prey suddenly unsure it was the predator. One raised a plasma glaive. Its head exploded before it finished the motion. Another spun around, its scanner lighting red. Too late. Its knees buckled, and it dropped, spines severed. The rest broke formation, splitting off in opposite directions through the snow. But the storm, the terrain, and Lex had become one by then. She didn't chase them. She predicted. She anticipated. One step ahead, always. Another enemy fell, clutching at a wound it couldn't see. Another screamed as it was pulled down into a crevice that hadn't been there moments ago. Inside the cave, the squad stared at their HUDs in disbelief. Enemy signatures blinked out one after another. No turrets fired. No drones deployed. No bombs detonated. Just someone, moving outside their detection range, eliminating the threat one by one. Jorv looked over at the entrance Lex had taken. No one had seen her since she left. Then the signal from the final attacker cut out. The feed dropped to nothing but static. For a few seconds, the storm was the only sound. Lex returned before dawn. Covered in frost and dust, eyes unblinking. She had a deep scratch across one shoulder and a strange smear on her forearm that wasn't blood. The squad stood up when she entered. Not out of protocol. Not out of discipline. But instinct. Lex placed 3 enemy comm tags on the table and said nothing. Then, for the first time, she opened the SAT case on her back and retrieved a small black chip. She inserted it into the outpost terminal. The screen flickered, and then it played audio from the enemy's own battlefield chatter. "They sent it again, the silent one, no sound, we can't find her, not even the trackers, it sees through shadows, abort mission, abort." Jorv didn't sit down again. The sniper packed his gear and muttered a transfer request to no one in particular. Even the automated turret turned slightly toward her and powered down as if it knew she had no need for it. Later that cycle, a medical scout arrived from the main base. Not to treat wounds, but to scan vitals. Lex let them, stood silently while they took readings. Her heart rate hadn't spiked once during the fight. Not once. Word reached high command by the next day. Not through official channels, but through rumor, whisper, and encrypted side chatter. Someone had leaked the enemy audio. Soldiers across several divisions began asking the same question. Who is she really? And why is there no record of any deployment before this one? Command tried to suppress the speculation, but it was already too late. Footage from the drone wreckage near the ridge was recovered. Thermal traces revealed a path that suggested near impossible speed and heat dampening. It looked less like a human moving and more like a shadow slithering through the snow. Earth Command received a formal inquiry from the Coalition's Internal Defense Office. It asked for a detailed service history of Sergeant Lex Wren. The response was a single page, half redacted, with the rest reading only, temporary field asset assigned for observational purposes. No mention of Unit Null. No mention of deep insertion missions. No mention of what she used to be. That night, Lex sat alone outside the outpost, watching the horizon as if waiting for something else to crawl out of the storm. She didn't blink when the second alarm triggered again. She just pulled her rifle into her lap, checked the chamber, and whispered a count under her breath. 8 this time. She smiled faintly. Better. Coalition Command had built its reputation on control. Every recruit, every weapon, every tactic, catalogued, tracked, reviewed. Nothing was allowed to operate without oversight. So when a junior officer from the Data Integrity Unit flagged an inconsistency in the kill reports from Glass Ridge, it sent a ripple through the entire system. The file in question wasn't the kill count itself, that was terrifyingly high but technically plausible. The problem was the source. The numbers weren't being logged by squad leaders, biometric drones, or automated defense arrays. They were all being tagged manually. And the signature attached to those reports belonged to someone who, by official record, shouldn't exist. Sergeant Lex Wren was now credited with 43 confirmed enemy eliminations in just under 2 weeks, more than double the average for an entire unit in this war sector. But no combat footage existed for over half of them. No drone feeds. No environmental triggers. Only the bodies. And every time the cleanup teams arrived, the corpses were marked. Same style. Same precision. Bullet or blade. No excessive damage. Just efficient, calculated removal. As if the kills weren't rage or defense, but obligation. In a quiet data cube several decks below Coalition HQ, an aging systems officer named Delrin took a risk. He used his override credentials to dig deeper into Earth's encrypted personnel archives. What he found didn't make sense. Lex's name didn't appear in any of the standard military registries. Not in the Mars training academies. Not in Earth's Navy. Not even in the planetary defense logs. Her existence started and ended with her transfer to the Coalition. That was impossible. Delrin dug deeper, triggering 3 security flags in the process. Then he found it. A ghost protocol buried under black clearance. Codename Unit Null. The files were corrupted, fragmented, but even in pieces, they were enough to redraw the shape of fear. Lex had not been recruited. She had been placed. Her original file listed her as Operative Designation V9, attached to clandestine kill teams during the Interstellar War, teams that had no formal rank structure, no battlefield oversight, and were only called in when diplomacy failed and silence was cheaper than soldiers. There were mention of infiltration missions into enemy capital ships. Deniable assassinations of planetary governors. Systems destabilized by engineered accidents that bore her name only in sealed documents marked eyes only. Unit Null was a myth among some veterans. A unit that didn't exist because the bodies it left behind couldn't talk. Delrin closed the file before he could learn more. He wasn't afraid of being caught. He was afraid of understanding. Meanwhile, at the Glass Ridge outpost, Lex continued her routine with chilling calm. She took patrols alone. She ate quickly. She slept with her boots on. The squad never questioned her anymore, not even Jorv, who had grown quiet and alert, like someone constantly aware that they were standing too close to something radioactive. Even the wind at the ridge had changed, softer somehow, like it knew better now. It was during one of her solo patrols that the real shift began. A Volscary scout intercepted an encrypted transmission from the enemy lines. It was garbled, full of distortion, but the tone was unmistakable. Fear. Not tactics. Not orders. But warnings. One line stood out more than the rest. Beware the one with no heat. No light. No sound. The humans called her Lex. The enemy had a different name for her. The Pale Echo. The soldiers in her unit didn't know what to do with that. They'd heard of legendary operatives, but never one who earned nicknames from the ones they hunted. The next supply drop arrived with not just rations and equipment, but a replacement officer. Coalition High Command had dispatched a tactical analyst named Marin to observe Lex's behavior and determine if she posed a threat to the greater stability of interspecies command. Marin was sleek, composed, and surgically polite. He smiled when he spoke to her, logged everything she said, and never once asked a direct question about her past. Lex barely acknowledged him. When he followed her on patrol, she walked faster. When he stayed back, she didn't radio in. After 3 days, Marin sent his first report back to command with one sentence. She does not hunt. She cleans. Still, he stayed. He watched. He waited. Until the day the snow stopped falling for 23 consecutive hours. That had never happened on Glass Ridge. The lack of cover made the outpost vulnerable. Enemy scouts were spotted gathering at the western cliffs, an angle rarely used. It felt off. Lex ordered the squad to shift position and pulled everyone off the ridge just hours before it was blasted by high-density plasma shells. The outpost was reduced to molten ice and ash. Her decision saved them all. When Marin asked how she knew, Lex finally answered. I saw the snow pause. I've only seen that once before. Before a cleansing strike. The others didn't question the term. Maran did. But when he looked into old strike records, he found the term cleansing strike used only in connection to unit null operations. A purge. Not just of enemies, but of witnesses. That night, he sent a private message to Earth's liaison. He didn't ask about her kill count. He asked if he was in danger simply by proximity. The liaison's response came quickly. If you are sending this message, then yes. Maintain distance. Record nothing direct. Observe until ordered otherwise. Back at the Coalition warbase, the kill report counters were lighting up again. Lex's name kept climbing. New sectors. New enemies. She was now responsible for more confirmed eliminations than some alien captains had scored in 5 tours. Yet her official rank hadn't changed. No promotion. No commendation. Just numbers rising like a tide no one could stop. Some commanders whispered about pulling her from the front. Others argued she was necessary. Let her do what she was made to do. But that argument never sat well with those who had seen soldiers break. Lex didn't break. She didn't even bend. And that terrified them more than anything. Maran finally confronted her near the cliffs, away from listening devices. He asked her directly. What are you really? What were you before this war? Lex looked out at the icy horizon and spoke quietly, so soft he almost missed it. I was the last option in wars that weren't supposed to happen. When Maran asked if she was proud of it, she turned to him for the first time in a way that made his skin crawl. I didn't survive pride. I survived orders. The next day, Maran requested reassignment. Not because he feared her, but because he realized something far worse. The Coalition hadn't deployed a soldier. They'd unsealed a weapon. One that never should have walked free again. And now, as the war escalated and more enemy factions began whispering about the Pale Echo, the Coalition had a new problem. Not controlling her, but surviving the consequences of letting her loose. The Coalition commanders met in a high-altitude warship above the Central Front, orbiting a dead world they had once fought over and forgotten. The room was made of cold metals and colder mines. Holograms of fleet movements flickered between them, but none spoke of tactics. All eyes were locked on one dossier displayed in the center. Lex Wren. No longer referred to by her rank, and not even by her Earth-issued name. Just the Pale Echo. Her kill count was now approaching triple digits. Most confirmed. Some unconfirmed. All terrifyingly consistent. But it wasn't the number that broke protocol. It was the effect. Entire enemy units were withdrawing from battle upon detecting human biosigns. Recruitment propaganda among allied species was crumbling. Morale was splintering. Alien soldiers whispered legends that no human denied. And now, Command feared the question none of them wanted to ask. Was she still under control? Commander Trelvek of the Irakari slammed a metal fist into the table. He declared that letting Lex continue was a violation of the Coalition's internal security accords. He demanded Earth take her back. Strip her of command. Confine her. Earth's ambassador didn't flinch. He simply asked if anyone wanted to be the one to attempt it. The silence answered for them. That's when the proposal came. A mission. Dangerous, essential, but designed with a double purpose. Officially it was to intercept a high-value weapons cached deep in no man's land. In reality it was a trap. A live-fire kill box set with advanced motion turrets, disinformation paths, and sealed comms. Anyone caught inside would have no extraction route. It would look like a battlefield casualty. And if Lex survived, they could claim it was an error. If not, the problem solved itself. The plan was approved without objection. Orders were sent quietly. Lex received her briefing alone. She read the mission data in silence. The map was clean. Too clean. No resistance paths, no heat map overlays. A zone far from strategic interest suddenly deemed critical. She didn't react. She didn't question. She accepted the deployment and prepped her gear. Maran, who had returned to observe from orbit, saw the file and understood immediately. He tried to issue a warning. It was intercepted. Scrubbed. He was placed on communication blackout, reassigned to a different ship. The Coalition was sealing all exits. Lex deployed alone. No squad. No drone support. A simple skiff delivered her to the outskirts of the kill zone and left without touching ground. The terrain was jagged, scorched, and oddly silent. Lex moved through it with methodical care, scanning not for enemies but for signs of manipulation. She found them within minutes. Turret mounts buried in rock. Automated mines designed to cloak only from Allied scanners. Satellite feeds that should have offered overhead visibility, but were transmitting loops. She smiled faintly. They had gone all in. Expensive. Precise. Thorough. But predictable. She advanced deeper into the zone, letting the first phase of the trap close around her. The Coalition commanders watched from orbit, silent as the signal trackers began registering energy spikes. The zone lit up. A radius of 10 kilometers activated at once. Lasers. Plasma. Seismic shock weapons. Lex was at the center. Nothing moved for 5 full minutes. The energy readings dropped to 0. The commanders began declaring the problem neutralized. Then the screen glitched. The perimeter sensors began blinking. Not from external movement. From inside. One by one, the systems were shutting down. Not destroyed. Deactivated. Lex was moving through the inner zone, disabling each defense array by hand, using the systems against themselves. One drone feed reconnected long enough to capture a frame. A motion turret was spinning uncontrollably, firing into its own wiring before powering off. Another array melted into slag as its coolant line reversed under pressure. She wasn't surviving the trap. She was reprogramming it. Then came the final message. A priority transmission from within the kill zone. Lex's voice. Calm. Direct. You should have aimed higher. That was when the Coalition warship above the zone registered unauthorized signal access. A protocol override had been injected into their emergency systems. The ship began rerouting its power grid, opening heat vents, and purging non-essential systems. Someone had rewritten its threat database. The ship now listed its own commanders as contamination risk. Lockdown initiated. Maran, still aboard, heard the sirens and knew what was coming. Lex had reached further than they'd calculated. She hadn't just broken their trap. She had used it as a ladder. A few minutes later, the command deck lights flickered. Emergency overrides failed. A hidden panel slid open. Lex walked into the center of the room, her rifle slung across her back, a small chip held between 2 fingers. No armor. No squad. Just her, and the fact that she had walked from the heart of death to their command throne without a scratch. The guards raised weapons instinctively. She didn't blink. The Earth ambassador stepped forward, face unreadable. Lex tossed the chip onto the floor. It skittered, slid to a halt. Trelvek moved to speak. She cut him off. That chip contains 10 minutes of recorded orders from this room. Orders to execute an Earth soldier under Coalition protection. Orders to falsify her deployment. Orders to suppress enemy communication intercepts. That is conspiracy to assassinate and treason under interspecies military code. Would you like me to play it on the fleet-wide channel? Silence flooded the room. She stared at each commander in turn. Not with anger. Not even disappointment. Just with the calm certainty of someone who had known this would happen all along. Then she turned and walked out. No one stopped her. Not because they couldn't, but because they were still trying to understand how they had failed so completely. Later, an emergency meeting was called. No one dared to document the discussion. It was agreed unofficially that Lex Wren would no longer be deployed without her consent. She would be allowed to operate independently. Quietly. Unrestricted. Not because of threat. Not because of loyalty. But because of fear. The fear that whatever leash they tried to place on her, she had already unhooked it days ago. Maran sent a single message to Earth Command after the dust settled. It read, "You didn't send her to fight the war. You sent her to show the galaxy what Earth does when it's not afraid to lose control." They never responded. They didn't need to. Lex was already gone, her signal vanished from trackers, her record deleted again. But the trap they built still smoldered on the dead world, a monument to arrogance. And the commanders who once mocked her now carried that silence everywhere they went, a silence shaped like footsteps in snow that never melted. The war changed after that. Not all at once. Not on paper. But in the way soldiers held their weapons, in the way enemy fleets adjusted their patrol routes, in the quiet that followed the name Lex spoken aloud. Entire units began requesting reassignment from human joint operations. Not because of conflict, but because of the shadows that followed her. There were no more jokes. No more bets placed on how long she'd survive. Now the only question whispered was how long she would allow anyone else to lead. Earth Command issued no statement. Coalition officials denied the existence of the kill zone debacle. But high-orbit data streams still carried one flickering image, copied too many times to erase. Lex, standing calmly inside the ruined warship, eyes steady, with the chip at her feet like a thrown gauntlet. Maran resigned his analyst post not long after. He left a final log entry in an encrypted journal, intended for internal use only. He wrote that Lex wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even a weapon. She was Earth's message. A living broadcast to every other species that humanity had survived its own chaos and learned to weaponize it. He described her presence as something elemental. Fire without smoke. Ice without reflection. And he closed the file with one sentence. She's what silence sounds like after the gunfire stops. Lex never returned to the central fronts. She wasn't ordered to. She wasn't even assigned. She moved between war zones without protocol, arriving just as resistance was collapsing or mutiny was blooming. In each case, the same outcome. The fighting stopped. Not because of overwhelming firepower. Not because of strategy. But because someone spotted her moving along a ridge or walking through a ruined checkpoint, and that was enough. Soldiers laid down arms. Enemy scouts abandoned position. One entire outpost broadcast a distress call and evacuated before Lex reached them. They left behind food, weapons, and a written note nailed to a post. "We're not dying today." In diplomatic circles, the shift was harder to define. Enemy species began questioning the value of continuing operations where humans were involved. Some suggested peace talks. Others requested immediate boundaries between their territories and Earth-aligned systems. What Lex had done wasn't just strategic. It was viral. Fear had always been a factor in war, but she had taken it out of the shadows and made it wear a human face. Eventually, the coalition could no longer contain the conversations. A summit was called. Not about Lex directly. No one dared to put her name in the schedule, but under the guise of joint force restructuring. Representatives from 7 systems attended, each more uneasy than the last. Earth's delegation arrived late. But when they entered, the room fell completely silent. Not because of who arrived, but because of who stood behind them. Lex walked into the summit chamber with no rank insignia. No armor. No weapon. Just her presence. The same small woman once laughed at for being too soft to hold a rifle. She walked past generals and warlords like they weren't there. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her file hovered behind her in projection, flickering with one line displayed in every alien language in the room. Active kills, 137. No team. No drone. No backup. The number updated mid-meeting. A representative from the Turalin Collective, a proud warrior race known for defiance, stood and demanded she be removed. He claimed the presence of a known threat was an act of intimidation and that the summit was being undermined. Lex turned her head slowly, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'm not here to intimidate. I'm here to listen. You're free to leave." He did. No one else followed him. The summit concluded with an unprecedented agreement. A formal treaty of distance. All species involved would acknowledge Earth as an autonomous partner in future engagements, and agree to limit deployment conflicts involving key human operatives. It was a veiled clause, buried in bureaucratic language, but everyone knew what it meant. No one wanted to be near her when the next war began. Some whispered it was the first peace born of fear. Others said it was justice in armorless form. Lex didn't stay for the celebration. She left the moment the agreement was signed, disappearing from the summit the way she always did, without sound, without record. Later that cycle, a low-priority cargo freighter on the edge of a collapsing border conflict reported that a human woman had boarded their vessel unannounced. She rode with them for 2 days, helped repair their core when it overheated, then vanished when they docked at a forgotten mining colony. The captain found a single bullet casing left on the dash. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. She was watching. As months passed, the war cooled. Not ended, not resolved. But slowed. Areas once drenched in constant fire were now eerily quiet. And somewhere in that quiet, Lex moved. Her name stopped appearing on official records. Her face became a blurred whisper in debriefings. No one knew where she was, only where she had been. One could trace her path by the silence that followed. Outposts cleaned without command. Mercenary groups vanishing without bloodshed. A pirate king who surrendered his station and vanished after reporting a brief encounter with a human woman in the fuel decks. Maran, now retired, heard one final transmission that made him pause. It came through an old frequency he hadn't used since the Ridge. A scout ship in the outer reaches had picked up a thermal signature alone in a ruin, unmoving. They dropped in to investigate. What they found was a single human camp set in a collapsed observatory, fire burning, rifle across knees. A woman in gray. She said one thing before they left. There's always another silence to clean. The transmission ended. No request for action. No suggestion of danger. Just the fact that she was still out there. Watching. Listening. And waiting. And from that point on, no one mocked Earth's new recruits again. Because somewhere, across every battlefield, every ruined cliff, every forgotten post, there lived the legend that if you laughed too loud, if you dismissed the human too quickly, she might be the one sent to remind you what a mistake that was. They called her the Pale Echo. But by then, she wasn't an echo anymore. She was the silence that came after.